More than 200,000 of those prisoners are female. Amna Nawaz takes a closer look at the conditions faced by women behind bars.
From extreme overcrowding and brutal conditions to shocking human rights abuses, some women's prisons are downright horrifying. Inside these walls, inmates face unimaginable hardships, lack of basic hygiene, poor medical care, and even mistreatment by guards.
Now under investigation, how a woman was able to take her own life while under supervision in a core civic jail.
But what's life like for the women trapped in these places? Join us as we take a deep dive into the harsh realities of the world's most notorious women's prisons, exposing the struggles, survival stories, and shocking truths hidden behind bars. Number 10. Antanamora Prison. In the heart of Antananarivo, Madagascar's lively capital, sits Antanamora Prison, a place that feels more like a forgotten dungeon than a correctional facility. While the country is known for its breathtaking rainforests and incredible wildlife, life inside this overcrowded prison is the exact opposite of paradise. Originally built to house just 800 inmates, Antanamora is now bursting at the seams with over 4,000 women crammed into tiny, airless cells. There's barely enough space to sit, let alone lie down comfortably. At night, prisoners are forced to sleep on top of each other, some with their feet resting on another's head, while the suffocating heat and overpowering stench of sweat, filth, and decay make it nearly impossible to breathe. The majority of these women have never even been convicted of a crime. About 60% of Antanamora's inmates are pre-trial detainees, stuck behind bars for months, or even years, without ever seeing a courtroom. Some are locked away for minor offenses, like stealing food to feed their starving children, while others are imprisoned under outdated, discriminatory laws. And as if the overcrowding and injustice weren't bad enough, the living conditions inside Antanamora are downright inhumane. Prisoners survive on a single meal a day, usually just a bowl of boiled cassava, a starchy root that provides almost no real nutrition. With no access to protein or essential vitamins, malnutrition runs rampant. Studies show that nearly 40% of the women here are severely undernourished, leading to weakened immune systems and a surge in diseases. There's barely any clean water, so inmates are forced to reuse filthy buckets for washing, and the few available toilets are either clogged or broken. Skin infections, tuberculosis, and typhoid spread like wildfire, turning the prison into a breeding ground for sickness.
They only let you see a doctor if you're on the verge of death. You have to take very good care of yourself and your child.
During the COVID-19 pandemic, the situation reached terrifying levels. Hundreds of inmates became infected, and with no medical care available, many didn't make it out alive. Back in 2019, President Andry Rajoelina paid a visit to Antanamora and admitted how horrific the conditions were. He promised urgent reforms, more funding, faster court proceedings, and solutions to overcrowding. But years later, not much has changed. The justice system is still painfully slow, and the women inside Antanamora continue to suffer, trapped in what can only be described as a living nightmare. Organizations like Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch are pushing Madagascar's government to take real action. Number 9. Patarei Prison. Perched on the windswept coastline of Tallinn, Estonia, Patarei Prison stands as a haunting testament to a brutal past. Built in the early 19th century as a sea fortress by order of Russian Emperor Nicholas I, it was originally meant to defend Estonia's shores from naval attacks. However, by the 1920s, its role shifted drastically, and it became one of the most feared prisons in Europe. What was once a stronghold against foreign threats became a place of unimaginable suffering, especially for political prisoners, many of them women, who were locked away during the Soviet occupation. Patarei wasn't just a prison, it was a place where fear lived. Its massive limestone walls, designed to withstand cannon fire, now served as barriers that trapped thousands of souls. The iron-barred windows let in little light, and the heavy wooden doors creaked with a foreboding weight. The corridors echoed with the muffled cries of prisoners, many of whom never made it out. Life inside was nothing short of a waking nightmare. The prison was notorious for its inhumane conditions, where overcrowding, disease, and psychological torment were the norm. Designed to hold only 1,200 inmates, Pattare was crammed with over 4,200 at its peak. Cells meant for a handful of prisoners often housed up to 40 people, forcing them to sleep on the damp stone floors or makeshift straw mats, surrounded by the stench of unwashed bodies and stagnant air. The lack of proper sanitation led to rampant outbreaks of tuberculosis, pneumonia, and dysentery, and medical treatment was almost non-existent. Winters were especially brutal. The icy Baltic winds cut through every crevice, and prisoners were given little more than thin, tattered blankets for warmth. The cold wasn't just uncomfortable, it was deadly. Former inmates recalled how frost would creep along the cell walls, and the chill was so deep it felt as if it had settled in their bones. Some prisoners died simply from exposure, their bodies stiff in the morning light. Torture and execution were a grim reality at Pattare. During the Soviet occupation, many political prisoners were interrogated, beaten, and even executed within its walls. The infamous shooting room, hidden deep in the prison, became a place of no return for those labeled enemies of the state. Soviet authorities often carried out mass executions here, with the victims' bodies later dumped into unmarked graves. Number 8. Black Dolphin Prison. Black Dolphin Women's Prison in Russia is a place where nightmares become reality. Hidden in the Orenburg region near the Kazakhstan border, this maximum security fortress is designed to house the absolute worst of the worst, women convicted of the most heinous crimes, including serial murders, acts of terrorism, cannibalism, and crimes so disturbing they defy comprehension. The prison operates with military precision, ensuring that its inmates are completely cut off from the outside world. Life inside Black Dolphin is a brutal cycle of isolation, control, and relentless discipline. Inmates are confined to tiny concrete cells measuring just a few square meters. These cells are fortified with 3 layers of steel doors, making escape impossible. The windows, if any, are positioned high up so that prisoners can't see beyond the walls. Unlike other prisons, Black Dolphin's inmates are not allowed to sit or rest during the day. They must remain standing or moving, reinforcing the psychological torment that defines life here. Surveillance is absolute. Guards patrol the corridors constantly, and inmates are monitored 24/7 by security cameras. Even during rare moments outside their cells, prisoners are forced to walk in a bent-over position, blindfolded, with hands locked behind their backs, ensuring they never learn the layout of the prison. This technique, known as sensory deprivation, prevents any possibility of escape and mentally disorients the inmates, further breaking their will. Meals are strictly controlled, consisting of watery soup, stale bread, and porridge, barely enough to keep them alive, but never enough to provide comfort. Conversations are nearly non-existent. Prisoners can only speak when given explicit permission, and many go weeks without hearing their voices. Any sign of disobedience is met with swift and merciless punishment. Perhaps the most disturbing aspect of Black Dolphin is its psychological warfare. Inmates are subjected to extreme mental stress, with reports of severe depression, hallucinations, and suicidal breakdowns being frighteningly common. The prison's environment is designed not just to punish, but to completely strip prisoners of their humanity. Black Dolphin gets its ominous name from a crude statue of a dolphin at the entrance, sculpted by inmates themselves. But there is no freedom to be found here, only an existence defined by suffering. Once inside, there is virtually no hope of release. Number 7. Butyrka Prison. Butyrka Women's Prison in Russia isn't just notorious. It's a waking nightmare that has haunted its inmates for centuries. Nestled in the heart of Moscow, this fortress-like prison has stood since the late 18th century, its towering walls hiding countless stories of suffering and despair. Originally meant to be a transit prison for those being sent to the brutal labor camps of Siberia, Butyrka quickly became something much darker, a suffocating dungeon where the condemned, the accused, and the forgotten were swallowed whole. This place has held some of the most famous and infamous figures in Russian history, from political dissidents to hardened criminals. But it wasn't just the high-profile prisoners who suffered. Thousands of nameless souls passed through its overcrowded, decaying cells, enduring conditions so horrific that even the toughest inmates dreaded being sent there. And for the women locked behind its iron doors, every day is a brutal test of survival. Cells built to hold 10 people are crammed with 20 or more, forcing inmates to sleep on cold, filthy floors or press up against each other like sardines in a can. The air is thick with the stench of sweat, mold, and hopelessness. Proper sanitation is almost non-existent. Sewage backs up, rats scurry through the corridors, and disease spreads like wildfire. Medical care is barely more than a joke. Many prisoners suffer in silence, their illnesses untreated until it's too late. Meals are little more than scraps, often moldy, rotten, or crawling with insects. Survival depends on luck, whether a family member can send a care package or whether an inmate can bribe the right person for something edible. Those without outside help are left to starve slowly, their bodies weakening along with their will to fight. But the worst torment isn't just physical, it's psychological. Fear hangs in the air like a thick fog. The guards wield absolute power, and their cruelty knows no limits. Beatings, humiliation, and psychological abuse are part of daily life. A wrong word, a wrong look, or sometimes no reason at all can land an inmate in solitary confinement, where the silence and darkness creep into their minds, breaking them piece by piece. Corruption runs deep. Money and connections can buy better conditions, while those without either are left to rot. Despite repeated promises of reform, Butyrka remains a place of despair, its horrors largely unchanged for generations. Human rights groups have condemned its conditions for years, yet little has improved. Number 6. Julia Tutwiler Prison. Tucked away in Wetumpka, Alabama, Julia Tutwiler's prison for women has become a symbol of suffering, neglect, and abuse. When it first opened in 1942, it was named after Julia Tutwiler, a well-known advocate for prison reform. Ironically, the prison has done the complete opposite of what she stood for. Instead of being a place of rehabilitation, it has become one of the most notorious women's prisons in the United States, riddled with overcrowding, mistreatment, and dangerously inadequate health care. Originally designed to house about 550 inmates, Tutwiler regularly held nearly double that number, sometimes cramming in close to 1,000 women. This extreme overcrowding created an inhumane environment where even the most basic rights were frequently ignored. In 2013, Mother Jones ranked it among the top 10 worst prisons in the country, citing a shocking pattern of mistreatment, lack of medical care, and horrific abuse by staff. The Equal Justice Initiative launched an investigation that uncovered deeply disturbing evidence of violence and sexual abuse. Female inmates reported being assaulted by guards, with some even becoming pregnant as a result. The situation was so dire that a formal complaint was filed with the United States Department of Justice. Their findings were damning, confirming that Alabama had violated the Eighth Amendment by failing to protect prisoners from abuse. Speaking out against these injustices often came with severe consequences. Women who reported mistreatment faced retaliation, including being thrown into solitary confinement or having their personal belongings taken away. One inmate shared how officers confiscated letters from her children, making her feel as if her very identity had been stripped from her. As if the abuse wasn't enough, the prison's crumbling infrastructure and inadequate medical care made life inside even more unbearable. Many inmates suffered from untreated illnesses, and in some cases, the neglect turned deadly. One woman nearly lost her life because she was denied medical attention until it was almost too late. Despite years of reports detailing these horrors, change has been painfully slow. In 2016, Alabama's governor at the time, Robert Bentley, announced plans to shut Tutwiler down. Yet, years later, the prison remains open, its legacy of suffering still haunting those within its walls. For many women, Tutwiler is not just a prison, it's a place where hope is crushed and trauma deepens. Pregnant inmates endure some of the worst conditions, giving birth only to have their babies taken from them immediately. Now it's time for today's subscriber pick. In a cold, dark prison, a group of women trembled as heavy chains bound their hands and feet. The guards dragged them to a towering wooden post, where they were left hanging, their cries echoing through the stone walls. It was a cruel warning. Anyone who disobeyed would meet the same fate. Days passed, but no one dared to help them. Just when hope seemed lost, a fierce storm struck, lightning shattering the post. The chains loosened, and the women fell to the ground. As thunder roared, they knew this was their chance. With newfound strength, they escaped into the night, determined to seek justice for the suffering they endured. Could they truly outrun the past, or would the prison's shadow follow them forever? Let us have your opinions in the comment below. Number 5. Vladimir Central Prison. Vladimir Women's Central Prison, located about 190 kilometers northeast of Moscow, isn't just a prison, it's a monument to suffering, a place where history and horror collide. Originally established in the 1780s under Catherine the Great, it was built as a fortress-like detention center, meant to hold criminals, political opponents, and anyone the Russian state deemed dangerous. Over the centuries, it transformed into one of the most notorious high-security prisons in the country. Its thick stone walls, heavy iron gates, and labyrinth-like corridors have confined some of Russia's most well-known prisoners, including Soviet-era dissidents, outspoken writers, and even high-ranking officials who lost favor with the Kremlin. During Joseph Stalin's brutal rule in the 1930s and 40s, Vladimir Central became one of the key sites in the Gulag system, where political prisoners were sent on fabricated charges of treason, espionage, or simply expressing independent thought. It was a prison within a prison, with its harshest inmates often shipped off to even worse forced labor camps in Siberia. Some never returned. Inmates endured merciless interrogations, and reports surfaced of prisoners being forced to sign confessions after weeks of sleep deprivation, starvation, and physical torture. Inside Vladimir Central, life was, and still is, brutally harsh. The overcrowded cells are so packed that some prisoners take turns sleeping on the cold concrete floor. The sanitation system is primitive, with broken plumbing and overflowing toilets spreading disease at an alarming rate. Rats and cockroaches are common cellmates, and outbreaks of tuberculosis, hepatitis, and other deadly infections are a constant threat. Russia's sub-zero temperatures hit hard, but the prison's barely functioning heating system offers little relief. Inmates often receive thin, tattered clothing, and many have been known to suffer from frostbite inside their cells. If the cold doesn't get them, the hunger might. Food rations are meager and barely nutritious, often consisting of watery porridge, stale bread, and a weak cabbage soup that lacks even the most basic nutrients. During Soviet times, prisoners were subjected to backbreaking forced labor, spending up to 16 hours a day in freezing temperatures, assembling military equipment, textiles, and even prison uniforms for their captors. Many collapsed from exhaustion and malnutrition, but stopping work was never an option. Those who refused to comply faced severe beatings, solitary confinement, or worse. Even in modern times, Vladimir Central remains a place of fear and brutality. Although the Soviet Union collapsed, reports of corruption, physical abuse, and human rights violations continue to surface. Number 4. Heilongjiang Prison. Heilongjiang Women's Prison isn't just a detention center. It's a place synonymous with fear, cruelty, and relentless oppression. Nicknamed the Cemetery of Falun Gong Women, this high-security prison in northeast China has gained international notoriety for its brutal treatment of inmates, particularly those who practice Falun Gong, a spiritual discipline rooted in meditation and moral teachings. Since Falun Gong was banned in China in 1999, practitioners have been relentlessly persecuted, with many sent to facilities like this one, where their faith is systematically crushed through physical and psychological torture. Inside these cold, fortified walls, women endure nightmarish conditions designed to break their spirits. Former inmates report being subjected to forced labor for up to 20 hours a day, crafting everything from textiles to electronics, products that often end up in global supply chains. Sleep deprivation is routine, with prisoners forced to sit in painful stress positions for hours on end, developing sores and infections that go untreated. Food is scarce, and what little they receive is often rotten or contaminated. Medical care is practically non-existent, and even the mention of illness is met with punishment rather than compassion. Liu Jingping, a former prisoner, described how guards forced her to sit motionless on a tiny stool for hours until open wounds formed on her skin. Going to the restroom was a privilege, not a right. Many women were forced to relieve themselves where they sat, further humiliating them. Another survivor, Wang Chunyan, was sentenced simply for refusing to renounce her beliefs. She was locked in solitary confinement for extended periods and forced to watch endless loops of government propaganda, all to brainwash her into submission. A particularly sinister tactic used by prison authorities is the deliberate isolation of Falun Gong practitioners. They are strategically separated to prevent them from offering each other even a glimmer of support or solidarity. This psychological warfare, coupled with constant surveillance and relentless interrogations, has led to severe trauma, with many women emerging from the prison broken, both physically and mentally. Some never make it out alive. Despite years of outcry from human rights organizations, including Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, Heilongjiang Women's Prison remains a glaring example of China's continued crackdown on religious freedom and political dissent. Number 3. Tadmor Prison. Deep in the unforgiving Syrian desert, near the ancient city of Palmyra, lies Tadmor Prison, a name that strikes fear into anyone who knows its dark history. Nicknamed Hell on Earth, this prison wasn't just a place of confinement, it was a living nightmare where cruelty knew no bounds. Those unfortunate enough to be locked behind its walls, especially women, faced unimaginable horrors, their only certainty being suffering. The very air inside felt heavy with despair, as if the walls themselves had absorbed decades of pain and agony. Hope was a distant dream, and survival was an everyday battle. Tadmor's origins weren't always so grim. It was originally built as a military base during the French Mandate in the 1930s, but by the 1980s, under the iron-fisted rule of President Hafez al-Assad, it had transformed into one of the most feared prisons in the world. Political prisoners, activists, and anyone accused of opposing the regime were thrown into its cells, where torture, humiliation, and execution were routine. The prison's chilling motto summed it up perfectly: "We are God. Your life and death are under our control." Amnesty International once described Tadmor as a place where torture wasn't just frequent, it was daily. Prisoners endured endless suffering, both physically and mentally. The methods of torture were as inhumane as they were creative, beatings so severe that bones shattered, electric shocks that left bodies convulsing, and acts of sheer degradation, like being forced to swallow dead animals. There were no visits, no books, no letters, just total isolation from the outside world. One of the most horrifying events in Tadmor's dark history took place on June 27, 1980. After a failed assassination attempt on President Assad, soldiers stormed the prison and carried out a brutal massacre. The number of victims ranges from 600 to 1,000, lined up and slaughtered in cold blood. For female prisoners, the suffering was even worse. Many were locked away in solitary confinement for years, subjected to beatings and other unspeakable violence. The prison courtyard, which should have been a place for fresh air, instead became a site of public executions, where prisoners were forced to watch their fellow inmates die, knowing they could be next. Despite every effort by the regime to erase these atrocities from history, survivors have begun to speak out. Their testimonies have shed light on the true horrors of Tadmor, revealing the full scale of its brutality to the world. Number 2. Bang Kwang Prison. Bang Kwang Prison, often dubbed the Bangkok Hilton, though there's nothing luxurious about it, is one of the world's most feared maximum security prisons. Built between 1927 and 1931 under the reign of King Rama VI, This fortress of despair was originally intended to hold Thailand's most dangerous criminals. Today, it houses around 6,000 inmates, including a significant number of foreigners, many of whom were caught in Thailand's ruthless war on drugs, where even possession of a small amount can lead to decades behind bars, or worse, the death penalty. From the moment a prisoner enters Bang Kwang, their suffering begins. New arrivals are immediately shackled in iron chains for the first 3 months, their ankles bruised and bleeding from the constant weight. For those on death row, the punishment is permanent. Their leg irons are welded shut, a haunting symbol that their only escape is through execution. These executions, once carried out by a firing squad, have now been replaced by lethal injection, but the fear remains the same. The daily struggle for food is another grim reality. The prison provides a basic meal, a watery broth with a handful of rice and a few wilted vegetables, barely enough to sustain life. The chit system, a form of prison currency, determines who eats well and who starves. Wealthier prisoners, often foreigners with financial support from home, can buy extra food, while the rest are left to fight, trade, or beg for a second serving. Those with no money rely on charity from Buddhist monks who occasionally donate meals. Some inmates even risk eating rats or insects just to survive, but hunger is just the beginning. Bang Kwang is notorious for its brutal discipline and harsh punishments. Guards have near total power over prisoners, and beatings are common for even the smallest infractions. Not folding a blanket properly, speaking out of turn, or even making accidental eye contact with a guard can lead to severe physical punishment. Reports of torture, forced labor, and solitary confinement are widespread, with human rights organizations repeatedly condemning the prison's inhumane conditions. Women prisoners, though fewer in number, face a different kind of suffering. Many report psychological torment, sexual harassment, and complete isolation, with little to no way of filing complaints. Foreign inmates, especially those who don't speak Thai, are at an even greater disadvantage, struggling to navigate the prison's corrupt system without outside help. A small glimmer of change came in 2013 when Thailand officially abolished shackles for most inmates. But despite this reform, Bang Kwang remains a living nightmare. Number 1. The Indiana Prison. The Indiana Women's Prison, established in 1873, holds a groundbreaking place in history as the first correctional facility in the United States built exclusively for women. Before its founding, women were often crammed into overcrowded and dangerous male prisons, where they faced horrific abuse, poor conditions, and little to no opportunities for rehabilitation. Reformers like Rhoda Coffin and Sarah Smith spearheaded the movement for change, arguing that female inmates deserved a more humane and rehabilitative environment, not just a place for punishment. The prison's first ever inmate, Sally Hubbard, dramatically entered its history books. Convicted of multiple homicides, she became an infamous figure, setting the tone for a prison that would house some of Indiana's most notorious female criminals. Over the years, 4 women have been sentenced to death in Indiana since the 20th century, though none were ever executed. One of the most controversial cases was that of Paula Cooper, a 15-year-old girl sentenced to death for her role in the brutal 1985 murder of Bible teacher Ruth Pelk. The case sparked international outrage, drawing attention from Pope John Paul II and human rights groups worldwide. The global backlash led to significant reforms, raising the minimum execution age from 10 to 16 and reshaping juvenile sentencing laws across the country. Cooper's case also led to another critical issue coming to light: abuse of power within the prison system. Reports emerged of disturbing relationships between inmates and prison staff, including a shocking case involving a therapist engaging in misconduct with incarcerated women. As a result, new laws were introduced to prohibit any form of intimate relationships between prison staff and inmates, aiming to protect vulnerable prisoners from coercion and abuse. Another infamous case tied to the Indiana Women's Prison was that of Sarah Jo Pender, a convicted murderer who became known as the Female Houdini after her incredible 2008 escape from the Rockville Correctional Facility. With the help of a prison guard and an accomplice waiting outside, Pender walked right out of the prison with a forged ID badge. Her 136-day run from the law ended when she was captured in Chicago, living under a fake identity. The escape exposed major security loopholes and led to an intense discussion about mental health support for incarcerated women. Originally located in downtown Indianapolis, the Indiana Women's Prison was later moved to Girls School Road in a shift towards rehabilitation-focused correctional strategies. What are your thoughts about the harsh conditions inside these worst women's prisons? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section below.